Hi, my name is Dima Postnikov. I live in Australia and work in banking sector. I specialize in digital identity and trust ecosystems. I was a part of two major open banking implementations for two largest banks in Australia. I'm also a member of OpenID Foundation FAPI working group that works on an industry standard for open banking security profile. I've also been researching trust ecosystems for open banking and digital identity over the last few years. Today, I will give a brief overview of trust ecosystems, go through some terminology, delve into some comparisons and observations. Then I will talk about what drives the adoption of those ecosystems. I am presenting my personal view only, based on my experience and experience of other people around the globe that I was fortunate enough to discuss this topic with. To set the scene, here's an example of a simple trust ecosystem, classic open banking example. Data providers have existing relationships with the users. Data providers provide data to data consumers via standard interfaces and with the user's consent. This enables users to access additional services from data consumers. It is a network of participants. We can have many users, many data recipients, and many data providers. On this screen, I have some standard definitions of the ecosystem and trust applicable to our topic. For the purpose of this presentation, I will treat open data and open banking ecosystems as the same. I will focus on this type of trust ecosystem. There is also another important flavor, digital identity networks, but this should be a subject of a different presentation. I will use data consumer term, but it could also mean TPP, API consumer, data recipient, API client. Around the world, every jurisdiction seems to pick a slightly different term. Data provider could also mean data holder, API provider, ASPSP. It's not just about the data. It's also about write access and other functions that can be exposed via API. But I will use data provider and data consumer terms for consistency going forward. Open banking is a truly global movement. It started off in Europe with Open Banking UK leading the pack. Open Banking UK has gone live with customer data in January 2018. Australia followed in July 2020. These are just some of the examples. There are a lot of different countries right now working on bringing open banking type of ecosystems to life. So watch this space. By no means this slide is 100% accurate. I've put it together quickly for demonstration purposes only, and I am inviting everyone in the know in each region to help me to keep it up to date. Open banking is usually driven by the government. There are a few examples of industry-driven or commercial ecosystems. Most countries focus on the banking sector only. Some countries like Australia, with consumer data right, trying to extend it to other sectors like energy or telecommunications. What makes it a trusted ecosystem? Presence of key components, a user, data provider, and data consumer that communicate to each other, make it interconnected system. In order to have a sort of trusted relationships between different components in a complex network, we need each component to behave reliably with a minimum set of standards and responsibilities. All integrations between the players to be based on a defined specification. Onboarding process to the ecosystem should be clearly defined as well. Rules, regulations, and technical standards make the secret sauce that make it a trusted ecosystem. So each player can trust another to behave in a predictable manner and to achieve the outcomes required. You might have noticed that I've added another box at the bottom of the diagram in the circle. Most of the ecosystems have a central registry or directory mechanism or discovery mechanism that allows participants to onboard and understand who's already onboarded, what's their status, what are they supposed to do, and what are they allowed to do. Now I would like to drill into these technical standards in detail, one by one, leaving business and legal rules and regulations aside for now. API specifications. These define payload of APIs, inputs and outputs. This area is very aligned to business or the main language and focuses on the resources ecosystem is designed to expose. For example, in banking, this would be customer, account, transactions, scheduled payments, etc. Every ecosystem in the past has typically designed their own API specifications. Some payloads have to be unique for each ecosystem or jurisdiction. Some can be considered common. FDX is one of the organizations that trying right now to standardize some of those API specifications across multiple markets. Security profile is probably the most important part of the technical standards, although I might be biased. It defines the framework for secure API access. This area is also the most standardized at the moment too, with Open Banking UK and CDI in Australia already live with financial grade API. They've chosen financial grade API version 1 advanced security profile. Other jurisdictions like US, FDX and Brazil are looking to adopt it as well. What is FAPI? FAPI is a security and interoperability profile for auth, for open banking and similar use cases with high security requirements. It has been started during Open Banking UK implementation and currently managed, curated by OpenID Foundation FAPI working group. Why would you adopt FAPI? Because you're going to get proven security and interoperability profile, vendor support, developer skills, global data recipient, data consumer familiarity, and conformance test suite that covers large range of positive and negative test cases. In my experience, it's a must. It's a massive help for each organization trying to implement FAPI. Consent capture. Consent capture management has been traditionally done in slightly different way in each jurisdiction. The main reason for it is there was no standard. There is an effort to standardize it at the moment in FAPI working group, and it's focusing on consent management, concurrent consent, and fine-grained consent. These areas haven't been previously covered by FAPI 1, but will be covered by FAPI 2. Including new grant management specification. Some jurisdictions have additional requirements like non-repudiation, which should also be covered by FAPI. There is no industry standard used anyway at the moment for the central registry or discovery mechanism, apart from certain aspects like dynamic client registration, where Open Banking UK and Australia use slight variations of the same pattern, where data recipients register with data holders based on software statement assertion from a central authority. This is just a crude example of how coverage of different parts of technical standards could be done with different specifications. This table attempts to compare just some aspects of technical standards used. For example, Australia has designed its own API specifications. It used same FAPI profile with some minor modifications. Approach to central directory has been copied as well with minor modifications. Again, the only other thing I'd call out here, European market, UK, with PSD2 had mandated strong customer authentication and dynamic linking or transaction signing. Australia didn't have this requirement. The differences between consent implementations in Australia, United Kingdom, and Berlin Group are displayed here. There are typically three types of authorization or consent capture mechanisms: redirect, decoupled, and embedded. Embedded is not recommended for security reasons. Decoupled approach allows for new and innovative ways to capture user consent that's more suitable to some scenarios, like multi-device scenario. Redirect has two flavors: traditional web-to-web or anything-to-web, and app-to-app. App-to-app is important because nowadays, majority of new applications come in the form of native app. And users also tend to authenticate or utilize their banking services via native apps as well. Australia has implemented only anything to web. United Kingdom implemented anything to web, app to app, and decoupled approach, which gives more options to users and data recipients. Fine-grained consent is important because it's more privacy preserving than coarse-grained consent, but it's also required for some of the use cases like payments. Consent management via consent API or grant management APIs, which is a new FAPI specification that I mentioned. It gives data recipients more understanding of what's going on with the authorization, with the user's authorization. What's the current consent status, authorization status? What exactly had the user consented to? In terms of adoption, UK has been live for 3 years now, including the pilot period, and is doing really well in my opinion. Australia has been on open banking journey for about a year to date, and it's still very early. Unfortunately, we went live with a limited set of functionality, no payments, no fine-grained consent, no consent API, as mentioned before. And in my view, that has impacted the level of adoption. Speaking about adoption drivers and adoption levers, regulation always will be the main driver from the supply side. That's what usually happens. The government prescribes all banks and financial institutions to provide the APIs. So that creates a supply. Minimum set of functionality for key use cases. It needs to be available to users and data recipients, data consumers. This will create the demand side. It is important not to reinvent the wheel because it makes it harder to generate adoption, harder to implement use cases. FAPI is just one of the examples why you would do it, because you get vendor support, you get developer skills in the market, and many other reasons that I've mentioned before. It is important to build a community early, be transparent and open. It's also super important to plan the change carefully. Once you're live, change becomes difficult, especially if the change impacts the way the participants interact with each other. transition states become, transition periods become important and painful. And I'll repeat it, but I'll repeat it again. Don't do custom. That kills adoption. That's all I was going to cover today. Please reach out to me if you have any other questions or have more information that can be added to this presentation. Find me on LinkedIn or Twitter. Thank you.